Whitney Webb just gave us the tip of the iceberg. We about to get into the next clip with my man Russell Brand and the interview he has with Mike Benz, expert and insider on the inner workings of the blob, talking about the censorship industrial complex, how the deep state manages info, how to create wars, how they run things like how the Ukraine war could be referred to as a CIA op, how they crush dissent, how big they actually are, how powerful they actually are, and how they cover their tracks. How the mainstream media is a propaganda machine for high-level elite. Mike is about to tell it all. Let's get into it.
Basically, this foreign policy establishment is what it's typically referred to in Washington. These are the elements of our national governments, both in the U.S. and in the U.K. and in NATO countries, that are supposed to be foreign-facing to manage, the empire, so to speak, but are supposed to be for the benefit of the citizens who live in that country. And what they've basically discovered is because of free speech on the internet, they've lost control over the bumper rails around democracy.
Government insider talking about how they lost control. What control do you think that they lost? Social media is the control that they lost, because all the voices in social media, they don't have control how they used to have control. Don't you remember the lady just said, we used to control the facts. We used to control the news. That was the lady at the Times. What do you think she was talking about? She was talking about this. They no longer do, so they're trying to rein us back. And this is how they're trying to rein us back, by censoring free speech. So now they could censor anything they want under whatever guise.
And media was typically controlled or intermediated by the state. And so now you basically have the foreign policy establishment against domestic populism, which is not a partisan issue. Left-wing populism and right-wing populism, both flank this kind of globalist or neoliberal sort of structure that we're describing. And so it's really not a partisan issue. It's not a Republican-Democrat thing. It's kind of a universal human experience now, trying to fight against this blob.
I like the
words to know, neoliberal.
Neoliberalism is contemporarily used to refer to market-oriented reform policies such as eliminating price controls, deregulating capital markets, lowering trade barriers, and reducing, especially through privatization and austerity, state influence in the economy.
And the reason why the universal human experience is because we all use the internet. It's the last free space for your mind. So now if we capture the internet, it's over. Y'all wrapped up. We have everybody on the planet, not just America and Europe. No. We got the planet. We got China. We got Russia. We got India. We got Australia. We got everything. We got the whole thing. That's why it's called the blob. That's why it's the blob.
Coined that phrase, the blob.
The blob.
But in many of my conversations lately, I've been quoting what you said about democracy, that democracy does not now mean electoral process and representation of the will of the people. It means the protection of a set of institutions.
I actually don't think democracy ever meant that. That's like the accepted interpretation. I found a military document that outlines what democracy is. It should be on the screen now.
I wonder if you would elaborate on that idea as it pertains to, for example, the protection of democracy in Ukraine and the obligation of the American or British taxpayer to not advocate for a diplomatic end to the war in order to protect Ukrainian people, but an ongoing, potentially unwinnable, potentially eventually nuclear war with an indefatigable and difficult to defeat opponent. How does the use of the term democracy apply here?
Well, that's a perfect example. I just want to start with one quick clarification. I wish that I had coined the term the blob to describe the foreign policy establishment. Unfortunately, that distinction goes to President Obama's Deputy National Security Advisor, Ben Rhodes, who used that term to describe the blob. And the blob loved the term so much that they now use that term lovingly to describe themselves. So right now on my X handle, I have a quote from Victoria Nuland's husband, since we're about to talk about Ukraine and a lot of the funny business going on over there. Victoria Nuland's husband is Robert Kagan. 1 week before the 2020 election, he wrote in Brookings a piece called "Respect the Blob." This was his advice for the next president of the United States 1 week before the 2020 election. He wrote, "Respect the blob, learn from the blob, love the blob." Wow. So this is one of the arch blob monsters whose wife is basically running the show of foreign policy in the hotbed of Ukraine, who's basically saying, if you want to have stability in your next presidency, you will love us and do what we say. In fact, you will learn from us. We are your master, not the other way around, which is really, I think, quite a profound insight that you can publish that publicly, and few will even bat an eye.
Yeah, they can publish that publicly because they're in power and they think ain't nobody gonna stop us. They're that arrogant to think that. Yeah, yes, that's why it's there. That's why it was said. We in power and nobody's gonna stop us.
Can't stop. Won't stop.
I can say, do whatever I want. That's the energy. Let me give you a little Bible verse. Matthew 7:15. I'm paraphrasing, but you know a tree by the fruit it bears. You heard?
But on the Ukraine situation, Ukraine has not had elections in 3 years. They banned elections a year and a half ago. They banned it again 6 months ago. It really is the archetypal example of democracy's redefinition from being a consensus of individuals to a consensus of institutions.
Did you know that democracy had a new definition? Because I didn't. And that they can just change it just like that. Or that they use democracy to describe something new. They say democracy every day on the telly. And it's not actually that. Did you guys know that that's what they did? Change words to fit their needs? Did you know that? Because I didn't. We found it out just along with y'all. That they will change the word to fit their needs.
We say that we are, in Ukraine to defend democracy. Meanwhile, there is no democratic vote. What we have there are, basically a set of what we call democratic institutions, which is a very, very nasty framing device intended to deceive people about what's really going on.
You don't say. They're trying to be deceptive, people. Surprise.
Surprise, surprise.
They're not Mr. Expert Insider. There's no way that they could be trying to deceive us using the same words to describe different things. Why would they do that? That doesn't make any sense, Mr. Government Baldman Insider.
See, we flood the zone with NGOs and civil society institutions, so-called civil society institutions, as well as getting hundreds of thousands of people on payroll in order to co-opt portions of the region that we are trying to politically control. So Victoria Nuland herself, who I just read the quote from her husband, respect the blob, learn from the blob, love the blob. Victoria Nuland, when she was the head of the U.S. Embassy in Kiev, ahead of the 2014 coup that was jointly orchestrated by the U.S. and U.K. governments, Victoria Nuland was on a panel where she publicly discussed how they pumped, the State Department pumped $5 billion into Ukrainian civil society in the run-up to that coup. So that is, they capacity built a regime change instrument with $5 billion in taxpayer money. And that gets distributed to a network of NGOs. So, for example, there's an entity called the Ukraine Crisis Media Center. Now, I talked about this just last night on Dan Bongino's show. We had the biggest stream on the internet going through this, where we discussed the so-called Red Lines memo. This was a memo by the democratic institutions of Ukraine. It was 60 or 70 undersigned civil society institutions who all got funding either directly from the U.S. State Department, USAID, or CIA cutouts like the National Endowment for Democracy, or through the George Soros networks, who's partnered with the State Department and NATO, where 1 week into Zelensky's election in 2019, they described all of the red lines that if he passed them in terms of policy in Ukraine, it would cause so-called political instability, meaning that they would overthrow his government. He would become as unstable as his predecessors were. And it was on security issues, financial issues, cultural issues, national identity issues. If they wanted to change the language laws and allow Russian as a speaking language back in the state, that these 70 plus State Department and UK Foreign Office funded NGO swarms would destabilize the country. But that's what they mean by democracy. They mean a consensus of those institutions, not the people who live in Ukraine.
Ah, I get it now. That's why we're going to help Ukraine for democracy, to help fight this fight to maintain this democracy in the world. Meanwhile, democracy doesn't mean the same thing that we think it means here in America. It means the institutions that they set up. Yeah, that sounds like socialism to me, repackaged and rebranded by some of the best branders and marketers to ever exist. Welcome to America, where all of the hustlers live. I could sell water to how do you say it?
I am a hustler, baby. I sell water to a well. I was born to get cake, move on and switch states. Cap the coupe with the roof gone and switch plates.
Yeah, that's extraordinary. And to learn of more of these peculiar marital partnerships like the one described between Victoria Nuland and her husband. In our country, Dame Caroline Dinenage, who's the head of our Department of Culture, who demanded successfully actually that YouTube demonetize me, and whose department has a lot of information on me that even Freedom of Information Act's requests have not yet fully revealed, who also is demonstrated pay groups like Logically AI as proxies to crush dissent, is similarly married to a man called Mark Lancaster. I don't know if you're familiar with this story, who operates PsyOps and formerly worked in crushing dissent or opposing foreign terrorist forces, and whose organizations have similarly been deployed against domestic populations in the same way as you've described. So whilst these institutions are what the synecdoche democracy now represents, it is a truly global phenomenon. Do you know much about Caroline Dinenage or indeed Mark Lancaster? And do you see similar themes in the USA and UK when it comes to crushing dissent, control, and controlling public discourse?
Totally similar themes. It's uncanny, actually. This is what's referred to as the transatlantic alliance.
I beg your goddamn pardon. The transatlantic what? Listen, anything that has transatlantic on it, I don't care. It's bad. I'm triggered. If you know what I'm talking about, you know what I'm talking about. I don't care. You listen to what I'm saying. Transatlantic, my yams. Sometimes words in certain orders trigger me because of the education I was fed as a youth growing up in New York public system. The transatlantic slave trade was the reference, and that's why I got so triggered, because of this chocolate skin.
You know, the U.S. State Department and the UK Foreign Office, there's almost no daylight between them. And in fact, one of the favorite tricks for U.S. citizens to be censored by the U.S. State Department or by the U.S. Pentagon, which are supposed to be foreign-facing, is for the State Department and the Pentagon to sign contracts or give grants to British censorship organizations. So almost all of the major U.S. censorship heavyweights have connections to the City of London. So, the Atlantic Council, for example, which has 7 CIA directors on its board, gets annual funding from the Pentagon, the State Department, and CIA cutouts like the National Endowment for Democracy, is London-based. You have the Center for Countering Digital Hate, London-based. You have the Institute for Strategic Dialogue, London-based. And every time these domestic censorship institutions, when you look up the chain, they are either U.S. or British intelligence, U.S. or British diplomacy, or U.S. or British, military, defense. So it's either defense, diplomacy, or intelligence. None of those are supposed to be impacting domestic citizens in either the U.S. or Britain.
Yet they are. None of them are supposed to be directly affecting us domestically, but yet they are. How is that? How is it that they're not supposed to, but yet they are? Does that make any sense? Seems like the plan is working perfectly again.
But they do, because the foreign policy establishment needs the money and it needs the mandate of the people who live here. So, we have a military doctrine here in the U.S. that we've, observed for decades around the 4 sort of theaters of war. There's the so-called strategic, the tactical, the logistical, and the political. And these are 4 ways to win or lose a war. Basically your grand strategy, your tactics, where you're going to attack, the logistical, what kind of supplies and how you get the supply lines all lined up so that you can pull off the tactics to achieve the strategy. But the 4th category is referred to as the political theater of war, which is that you can win or lose a war simply by swaying the hearts and minds of the people who live in the target country to support or oppose the war. So, for example, the military establishment, still to this day maintains in large part that we lost in Vietnam, the U.S., not because we lost on the battlefield or we lost strategically or logistically, but because we lost politically. And the hearts and minds of the people who lived in the U.S. decided to defund the Vietnam War and decided to basically scale back the legal mandate for the military to operate there.
So even during the Vietnam War, people had the power, and they used that power. What power did they have? Public opinion. Surprise, they opposed the war. Y'all remember that time in America when everybody was so high and loving each other openly? The hippie movement? That's when we got some of the best weed that we ever probably had. It was because of that movement that the U.S. still says that they lost that war, the Vietnam War, because the people were convinced that they lost it. So it is very important what you think and how you feel about things. This is not just fluff. It's even more now because now you can openly disagree with it on the internet. So please start voicing your opinions because it matters. The algorithm will catch it.
And when George Bush rose to power and did, basically the Gulf Wars of the 1990s, there was that famous quote of, "By God, we kicked Vietnam" syndrome. This new jurisdiction of the blob, of the foreign policy establishment, to specifically target domestic citizens to make sure that they cannot vote against the priorities of the foreign policy establishment, has completely inverted our grand conception of what democracy has meant since the French Revolution. Because what they're essentially saying is, listen, we're going to let you guys decide amongst yourselves about what kind of tax policy you want to have.
And what's the evidence of that? That big C-19 that just happened, you heard? Where they sat everybody down. That's the evidence that we don't really have control and that the people are not really in power. Them sitting everybody down and getting away with it, even though they got caught. Now it was wrong. Is there anybody going to jail? Is there anybody getting locked up? Is anybody getting blamed for it? Where's the public outrage? Y'all not tight about that? I still don't have a job. You heard? I used to have a job. I still don't have a job.
Or if you want a stop sign on your local street corner. But when it comes to foreign policy, you, the people of the homeland, are basically subjects of this foreign policy overclass. It's very similar to the way second world governments are often structured, where there's a hybrid government structure. Pakistan's a great example of this. There's a democratically elected prime minister, but there's a military and intelligence side of the government who controls all foreign policy formally. And when the prime minister attempts to change the foreign policy of the country, as Imran Khan did, they will get cooed out of office by the military. And this is essentially what we're living through right now, both in the US, in the UK, and throughout NATO. And, this is one of these things where if it's not stopped immediately, this is a cancer that will metastasize to the heart and lungs. And it's very hard to see a way out of it with another few years of maturity.
And the only way I see out of this is if we could take control or take more control over social media. If we don't allow them to write these rules about social media and we actually protest them by not using certain apps and moving a certain way. This next clip, you got America's sweetheart, our baby boy, Tucker Carlson going off, man. I never listened to Tucker Carlson before America hated him because he was on their side, so I thought. But now they don't mess with him. So he's all right. He's kind of good. Anybody from the mainstream media objects, they all right. Because they're telling the truth in some capacity. It's the same problem when my man Cat Williams has, and you can't tell the truth in the mainstream media because that's not what the mainstream media is for. The mainstream media is to lie to you. America used to have propaganda laws on the books, but in 2013, I believe they got overturned around when Obama was in office, and propaganda has been able to run rampant, and that's what we're seeing right now.
Just for president, just in this country, and there are, by the way, 150 other countries where there's similar volatility unfolding, certainly in every Western country. But just in our country, you've got two people running for president. One of them is literally senile, not attacking the guy, but that's true. Maybe not fully aware that he's president. The White House is being run by a cartel of people for whatever ends. We have no visibility into that. We don't know.
This is exactly why Tucker is not their baby boy no more. He's talking about Sleepy Joe, the savior of America. Sleepy Joe, he called the presidential cabinet a cartel. He said they part of the Sinaloa cartel. Tucker bugging.
What the plan is, we know the guy they claim is running it is not running it. So that's grotesque. And by the way, no one ever mentions it. People snicker at Joe Biden. I try not to because I feel bad for him, because I don't believe in making fun of old people or the disabled. I'm serious. I really don't. I feel guilty every time I say it, including now.
And I don't feel bad for him. My son been doing a lot. Joe Biden was front running those 3 strike laws. Y'all remember those 3 strike laws? I don't know if y'all ever seen the 3 strike movie with Brian Hooks and DJ Pooh and Big Worm.
In 1993, a law was created giving citizens 3 strikes.
Ladies and gentlemen, Rob has left the building.
Rob has one more chance.
Screw up again, Rob, and that's your butt.
Yeah, the 1994 crime bill. Yeah, so y'all don't feel sorry for Sleepy Joe, man. He locked up a lot of good brothers in his day, out of nowhere. How quick America forgets.
But it's just true. He's not running the country, and yet he's standing for re-election at the age of 80, okay? Opposing him is a man who has been indicted 4 times and is facing life in prison. Life in prison. And every time he gets indicted and every time they tack years on to the sentence, this potential sentence, he becomes more popular, and now he's winning. So I love it. Amen. But it tells you a couple.
And I wonder, they're trying to indict him so badly. That's what I'm always suspicious. That's why we even here. It's because they didn't like Trump as soon as he started telling the truth. As soon as Trump went up there and started telling the truth, they was like, oh, whoa, hey, who's this guy? Cut this guy's mic off. Cut his mic off. They didn't think this guy would go up there and tell the truth. What the hell you hired him for? The truth. We didn't hire you for the truth over here. That's not what we do over here. We spread lies. This is America. Cue the
Couple of things. One, the side that's indicting him doesn't want him to be president so badly that they are willing to indict him on what are transparently ridiculous charges, okay? And two, the public is not only not buying it, it is incentivizing them to support him. Indict him again. Arrest him again. March him out to the gallows. He'll become king. So it's literally counterproductive. So what does that tell you? It tells you that the people currently in charge have no idea how the country works, what the country wants, and they don't care. They don't understand human nature. They're desperate, and they'll do literally anything. And he's winning.
Oh no, Tucker, the people in charge absolutely know how the country works. What are you talking about? They the one who made it. They the one who caused the problem, of course. We don't care about the ills of poor people or colored people. What? Though you see, they don't care about us, and guess what? You've become one of them as soon as you started telling the truth. You one of us. Because they don't pay you to tell the truth. They pay you to talk about what they paid you to talk about. I don't think you get it. And that's probably why they fired your ass, because you ain't get it. Sorry, buddy. Welcome, though. Welcome. Welcome to the others. Welcome to the other side.
First thing you need to do is understand the terms and the stakes of what's going on. The big lie that we tell ourselves, and that I have told many times, is that this is political. This is not political. What we're watching is not political. This is not politics. Politics is a human-conceived system whereby civilized people settle their differences without violence and by consensus. Politics describes a negotiation. You want this, I want that. Neither of us is going to get exactly what we want, but we'll each come away thinking we didn't get totally hosed, and we can continue to live together. That's what politics is. And that's why nobody wants to watch it, because it's filled with horse trading and accommodations. No one exits the process pure. Everybody has given up something. That's the nature of it. And while it's unattractive, like watching heavyset people have sex,
I never really watched them before until now because they was public enemies. But as I watched Tucker, this guy's making jokes about fat lovers. It's type funny. It's all right.
It's absolutely necessary, and it's kind of beautiful in its way. In its way, everyone deserves love. And everyone deserves to live in a country governed by politics, not force. You say you hate politics, what's the option? Force. You only get two options.
And guess where we live now? We live in a country governed by force. Do you guys know that? Do you remember that they locked us down? That was force. Do y'all remember when they fired us because some of us didn't get the jab? That was force. So we don't live in the country that he's describing. We live in a country that uses force. And they've been using force this whole time. Now, it's just other groups of people that are on the other end of the stick of that force. Our Caucasian persuasion brethren. They just on the other end of that stick of that force. See, y'all used to get kept away from getting spanked. Now y'all getting spanked because we need taxes from everybody. We need that money from all of y'all. You feel me? We can't discriminate no more. We've been letting y'all slide. Now y'all gotta come pay. Y'all gotta pay up. Ain't good. I'm glad that y'all witnessing that force because now y'all understand who's really against us. Us being the people that want freedom to live our lives away from government despotism. That's another word that you should know.
Despotism is a state or a system of government in which the ruler has unlimited power.
And we're past the political stage. Nothing, that's exactly right, whoever said that. Nothing that is happening now, or that has happened for the last 5 or 6 years, can be explained through conventional political terms, period.
Facts. It's not conventional political terms because the deep state has been moving. They've been flexing. They've been out here. They like the name that they called them. Are y'all serious? They picked up the name and said, yo, we like this blob name. This blob name, this suits us, you know? This blob, you know what? I like this blob name, honey. They called us the blob on the internet today. I like that name. We're gonna use it. We're gonna use it against them. That's what they was doing. That's why we got the story. That's how arrogant this guy is. This lady's husband. We didn't even say his name. I forget his name. What's his name? What's Victoria Newland's husband? He's the one who said, yo, we're gonna take the blob. They just made it to the news too. I ain't cover that because there's so much news to cover that, you feel me? This is a one-man show, man. I can't just cover everything.
In a convention, and I hear people miss this all the time. Whatever awful thing is happening, and I've contributed to this endlessly, you find out that someone's getting a vig on something. Someone's making a little money on the deal. And you're like, oh, it's all about the money. Follow the money. It's all about the money. I've said this myself 1,000 times. Since I quit drinking, I say it less. But still, follow the money. And, you know, if it were only about the money, we'd be fine. We'd be fine.
Even though he's not saying it, you know what he's talking about, right? It's not just about the money. It's about power. It's about control. It's about the kids. That's another thing that's not really said openly. They touching on them kids, man. Yeah. And our Caucasian brothers and sisters, they scared. They know. They seen it. They seen some of them tunnels. We might not seen them in the news, but it's going around them circles, man. I'm in a couple of those groups. I seen them. They heard the stories. So they know it's not just about this. That's why it's scary for them. And that truth gonna come out soon too. They heard the stories, you know, the people, what's going on with the Epstein case. His death busted this whole thing open. And I don't know if you really understand that, but that's what's really going on. We're gonna have an episode on that, but let's get back to Tucker.
So there have always been liars, and there always will be. But what we're seeing now is very, very different. Because the kinds of lies, there are two things that make it different. The kinds of lies that we're hearing are not conventional lies.
And on that note, we're gonna cut out from Tucker. This is super duper facts, Tucker. We're dealing with professional liars, professional, expert, marvelous liars, people that have made it their life goal to be the best liars that they can be. And they all work within the government. They're all part of the blob. They're all part of the censor industrial complex. They're all part of all these agencies to control the masses, basically. That's what their function is, to control you. Content creators, I'm always talking to y'all because we're actually it. Collectively, the more we stay in our own little Delulu world and keep making the content that we're making and you having the followers follow you, the more that we're actually making a change, because attention is the currency right now. It's always been the currency, but they had our attention growing up. They had our attention in those black boxes, those amazing TV shows that they like. They have our attention on this too now, but only thing, we're not listening to them. We're making our own stories, we're following our own paths, we're living our own lives, and we're doing it openly. And because we're doing it openly, they could see it, they know that we're not following them. So keep on doing what you're doing. Even if you think it's silly, you're actually making a difference. You're making a difference because you're taking somebody else's mind and you're taking it away from the government. You're taking somebody else's time. You might be educating them. You might be helping them forage for flowers. You might be helping them fix their life up. You might be helping them financially. You could be teaching. Whatever you're doing the Lord's work, because you're taking that person away from people trying to control them in ways that they never voted for and they never wanted in the first place. So let's keep up the bad work, you heard? Let's keep up making content every day. Let's keep up protesting and fighting the powers that be, because it's working. If it wasn't working, they wouldn't be fighting so hard to pass these laws, because they can't just shut us off like they tried. They gotta pass laws now to shut us off. They gotta spend money now to shut us off, and it's still not gonna work, because as soon as they cut one platform off, another one is gonna pop up. So let's keep on doing this. We actually got them on the ropes, you heard? We actually got them in a certain place. So keep it up. Stay tuned to get more insights, more critical thinking, facts, and questions. Remember, the last free place is your mind. They can't control what you think. Check back next week for another episode of Knowledge.